Okay, we're live. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I have Witchy, Bitchy, Nikki here joining me for this live stream. I'm also going to put the link in chat if anybody wants to come up and join the discussion. You're welcome to. It doesn't matter if you homeschool or public school, America, Canada, somewhere else, it don't matter. We're just here to have a discussion. So all opinions are welcome. So, do you want to say anything?
Well, I
Why
really
don't
appreciate you inviting me to take part in this discussion, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say and to share what little I know about educating children.
I know that it's different for every state in America, but you've mentioned some things over the as long as I've known you that just had me puzzled as or surprised that you had to deal with certain things. So it, I'm interested to maybe discuss those things and dig deeper into it. Um, well, why don't we start off with like just a basic introduction though? With I've been homeschooling for my is since my kids became school age, since my oldest became 4 or 5. So they've never been in the public school system at all. But you're a little different there. Do you want to just like talk about your experience with education and why you switched into homeschooling?
Well, I have 5 children of varied age groups. So I have 3 adult children and 2 small children. With my 3 adult children, we started out the traditional route doing brick and mortar with all 3. And I found that while my daughter was quite comfortable and was excelling in that environment, both of my boys seemed to struggle. Um,
Right.
I knew that my youngest boy at the time had difficulties, but his father was very adverse to diagnoses. So his autism spectrum diagnosis didn't come till later, but we knew he had difficulties, and it just became obvious that it would be better for him. And I'd had experience with homeschooling and Montessori when I was younger with friends who did it, and I did some too during my cancer treatment. And I just felt it was going to be the best fit for the boy, for my youngest boy. And then the older boy found that he wasn't interested in it. And well, one of them is now a journeyman electrician, and the other one is a sophomore in university.
That's
And
amazing.
my youngest boy at the time, he's really the middle child now because I have 2 younger daughters. But he did go back to brick and mortar for high school because he was missing out on some of the social aspect, and because our state started offering a lottery scholarship, but you could only get it with one of their public school diplomas and not with the equivalents.
Right.
And then
So
my
you
2 younger ones started out in brick and mortar uh, at the public schools, and both had some abuse levels of abuse occur to them at school, and I just couldn't tolerate it. So I decided we were gonna do homeschool with them, and now what I'm working on is mostly deschooling, moving into unschooling, but that's kind of a different thing.
right. Well, that's interesting though because you've seen uh, one of your children move on to the adult world through homeschooling. And there's one of the big myths surrounding homeschooling is homeschoolers don't succeed. So you have an experience that contradicts that right there. I'm not quite there yet. My oldest is only 14. She's got a couple more years to go before we talk about college and university and all that stuff. Have you heard that myth that people say that homeschoolers don't get anywhere in life?
So what I've heard is that they tend to be awkward and socially maladjusted, and that affects
Hmm.
them, like career wise and lifestyle wise. But um, it, having one who did the brick and mortar public schools all the way through,
Right.
I can't say that she's any more well adjusted than the ones that, they're in their 20s, so they're not well adjusted at all, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well,
They're going through the 20s, but I can't say that there's that much difference other than personality, uh, as to the form of education. I think that um, some kids, like if I had forced my daughter into homeschool the way the boys did, she would not have thrived in it.
right.
It's
Well, you would
it,
know that best, being her
right,
mother.
and that's the thing, is that you have to take each and every individual child individually, and that's where public schools fail the most, is that they try
Yeah.
to do a cookie cutter approach.
Yes. And kids get left behind with that.
Or held back.
Yep.
The left behind is hard enough to face, but parents should really be making up for that. It's the held back that really affects our society the most, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. I I grew up in the public school system, so kids that go to public school can be socially awkward as well. But I was more here, and maybe it's not as big in America because things might be different. But one of the big worries here that people have is homeschoolers not being able to get into college and university. But I did some research and I found that colleges and universities tend to seek out homeschoolers.
Well, I don't know a lot about Canada, but I do know that in general, universities internationally have similar standards because there's a lot of international students and whatnot. Um, and I know that quite often, uh, your previous education is irrelevant to the placement tests. Like, I think one of the standard ones is still the oh, what's it called? S. Oh, my kid just took these before he started college. SATs and
Right.
ACTs. So I think like placement tests really are where they determine uh, how you're going to be treated at the college level. I mean, unless you're trying to get into Ivy League private schools, and then, you don't just have to have money and good grades, but they have to have been volunteering, and they have to have some sort of talent.
Right.
And here in New Mexico, we did something really great. Is we made in-state tuition free for all adults for four-year colleges if they don't have a bachelor's degree. As long as you've got a
Wow.
high school equivalent now, you don't even have to have the high school diploma now. They changed it to where even those with an equivalent. Um, so my oldest, although he does have his journeyman electrician, since he went straight through homeschooling, he got an equivalent and not the state diploma, so he wasn't eligible for the tuition scholarships, but now he is. So he's even considering going back and doing college.
Oh, wow. That's amazing that they provide stuff like that. I'm not aware of anything here in Canada. It's very expensive to go to college and university here.
Right, you guys don't even have like Pell Grants like we have here in the States, right?
No,
Have you
no,
ever heard of Pell Grants?
no, no, I haven't. It's
In the States, if you're low enough income, you can apply with the
Right.
federal government, and they'll pay your tuition.
They give out grants to some students, but they're there's something that you got to work towards, and they're awarded to you if you qualify.
Well, there's scholarships here that are based on merit, but Pell Grants are just based on need, not merit. So they're kind of cool that way. But um, it, also, though, you guys get assistance, don't you, for homeschooling? The
Actually, over the last couple of years, that has changed, and it's not the same in every province. Most of the provinces give no funding at all to homeschooling. BC and Alberta did, but um, in 2020, they made up a new bill that weaned that out. In 2021, it was less, and in 2022, which is this year, it was nothing. And they also took a lot of funding away from the independent homeschools. Like, we have public schools, and we have schools that are for homeschoolers to register at and to get resources from. And they offer teacher assistance because there's two different kinds of homeschooling programs. You could be completely on your own, away from the school system, and do it all yourself, or you can do it through one of the homeschooling schools and have a teacher assigned to your child, and they get you to do things with your kids every week, and you do follow-ups and tests and stuff like that. Now, the BC just took that funding away from these schools and took all of the funding that homeschoolers would get for each kid. Like, it wasn't much. Like, a couple of years ago, I used to get about $130 per kid that was homeschooled. You get it once a year as like a rebate. This and last year it was less, and this year it was nothing. So they completely took that away.
See, here we don't have anything like that. There's a few options for homeschooling. The first would be public homeschooling, which is kind of similar to what you described. They're assigned a computer that the school provides, and they have to log in and be present as if they were in school, but virtually. With one
Okay.
of the academies, they use K-12 and Connections Academy here in New Mexico, and they provide a curriculum and teachers, and it's all done online. Um, we did those. We tried both of them, and I didn't like them. It was too easy to cheat.
Right.
You could mark everything wrong, get to the end of the lesson. It would show you the right answers, and then you could take the lesson again.
Oh, wow.
You, were, you weren't really learning anything. You were just getting a piece of paper. Um, I mean, because you pay for it, right? They got to make sure the
Yeah.
kids actually pass it all, right? And we didn't pay, the state paid, but these are private companies that the state pays. Um, and then the another homeschooling option is there are homeschooling groups where you can, it's technically homeschooling because they're not certified schools, but your child can go to a Montessori style school or a naturalist style school where they don't have to sit at desks and follow the same rules as public school, but it's still brick and mortar away from home. Um,
Oh, okay.
and then there's the option that I chose now, which is full homeschooling, where you have to have a bachelor's degree. You have to have a learning coach or teacher who has a bachelor's degree, and you have to apply to the state to basically open your own school. I could even technically take on students who aren't my kids now that I have the school registered. I don't plan to do that, but I could.
Interesting. So you had to have a degree to homeschool, and you had to open up You had to jump through hoops to be able to homeschool your own children. To
Well,
see
yeah,
it.
and still, if I don't keep records, if I'm ill prepared and someone at the schools or somebody calls in a concern that they see my kids aren't attending a public school, they'll send out social workers to verify that I'm not depriving them of their education.
Wow, that's crazy. See here, um, when you are registered as just a traditional homeschooler, is what they call it, where you have the the province or the school committee has no authority over you. You don't have to assign tests. You don't have to give um, anybody any records of what curriculum you used that year or what tests you gave out or the final grades or any of that stuff. You don't. The only thing I need to do is have them registered as homeschoolers by September. That's it.
Well, here in the States, we have some pretty strict laws state by state about child abuse and neglect. So it's not
Right.
really about the schooling, it's about maintaining um, contact with these children to be sure they're not being neglected or abused. Um, and one of the things that's considered neglect here in the States is depriving them of their quote unquote right to an education. Um, so, I mean, typically they don't bother homeschoolers, they'll leave you alone. However, you do have to sign up in the spring for the end of year national standardized testing.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to be meeting at least close on to grade level, or they can take you to court and say that you're neglecting them educationally if they're not meeting grade level standards. So like I don't give them tests, and we don't focus on real what people would call a curriculum, because we're deschooling right now, which is trying to impress on them that learning comes in moments and not in a controlled environment.
Right. I wonder if those policies became in effect because there was abuse being found.
Oh, well, in my state in particular, um, in the last, okay, if you only go 5 years back, there's at least 12 cases that have made national news for the level of abuse. We're talking kids in cages. One
Wow.
girl was being prostituted out, and they found out because she was dismembered after one of her Johns killed her. She was 8 years old.
That's disgusting. Wow.
So neglect and abuse, we're one of the poorest states in the nation. We compete with Alabama and Mississippi for the bottom three slots in education and poverty in the United States every year. And so in these poorer states, you really do find a lot of abuse and neglect. So like my kids get a state funded insurance right now. And to maintain that, if I don't take them to regular appointments and maintain most of their immunizations and stuff, they will call social services and say I'm neglecting my children. With the schooling situation, if someone were to just call on me, luckily, I'm prepared. I have everything in order. If they come out, it's not gonna show I'm neglecting my children, because I'm not. But if I were slacking and not keeping good enough records and somebody didn't like me and just called the child services on me saying, "Oh, those kids are homeschooled and she's not doing anything with them. She spends all day on YouTube, and those kids are learning nothing." They would come out and investigate that.
That must put some pressure on some parents. But do you find that those restrictions are making things better for children in your state?
I do. I think that if there's not some sort of limits, you'll have kids who really aren't getting any sort of education, especially in families where there's a truancy issue already, and they're in poverty, and the parents are both working, and they use homeschooling as a way to get out of legal trouble with truancy. Because here in the States, if your kids don't go to school, they put you in jail.
Oh wow.
Yeah, if it's a repeated offense and it continues to be a problem and you can't keep your kids going to school, they will charge you with a crime.
I know here it's law to hold on, give me 1 minute.
While she's busy there, I wanted to address the chat. Hottie had said, uh, my worry is the social aspect of it. You know, these days kids get a lot of their social um, virtually, just like us adults do. And in addition, most cities have homeschool groups where you can get together, or like, say you're really good at culinary, like cooking, and your buddy's really good at maths. So you host a day where the kids come to your house and you give a cooking lesson, and your buddy hosts a day where they're good at maths and everybody comes over and gets a math lesson. Or there's groups where we go and meet in the park. They have the athletics just like a regular school does, where you can participate. Typically, even in if you're homeschooled, whatever district you're supposed to be in, your kids are allowed to participate in the clubs and athletics there. So you just have to get them to the practices, you know. And hello, Vic and Topher Life and Popcorn and Penny Bunny. And of course, What's Truth's here.
Oh yes, we should definitely say hi to everybody in chat.
Well, I mean, while you were busy, I thought instead of leaving dead air, I'd do something.
Well, thank you. The little guy was fussing. What was
Yeah.
Ajot's question?
She was just saying that she's interested in it, but the social aspect worries her. But her student she's talking about already has social issues anyway in school. And that's another thing too about homeschooling, that is a myth, that people will say that they're socially awkward, or they don't uh, get to socialize as well. In fact, I think they're less socially awkward and less socially conditioned. Like their
Right.
responses are natural in social situations and interactions, instead of um, rote by some social standard. You know,
I
they don't
agree.
all, stand up and pledge at the same moment. Do you know what I mean?
And then there's a lot of interaction with all age groups instead of being stuck all day with just people your own age, which I find helps with socialization. I was able to socialize my kids because here we have a big homeschooling community where there is groups that plan field trips together and sports days and trips to the playground for play dates and all that stuff. So they're able to socialize and get interaction with other kids that way. And I also registered my kids for martial arts, which got them interacting with lots of other kids.
Yeah, the social aspects are very easily accessible here too. Like I was just saying, even the schools, if you're in district for a public school, your student can still participate in the clubs and sports of the school. So, like at the school my girls would go to, they have some after school clubs, a gaming club, a church club, those sort of things. And the girls are welcome to still participate in those.
Yeah, they do the same thing here too. If you're registered with one of the local public schools, you're allowed to participate with that school with certain events.
We also have, and this is more for people who have the means, there's a lot of paid events for homeschooling kids where you can pay a fee and have them included in field trips and outings that aren't, free to the public.
Yeah, and workshops, woodworking, and all that stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the things I'm considering doing in the spring is offering a crochet workshop, a virtual crochet workshop where we do like a Zoom meeting.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I'm most of the stuff that I've found, uh, even in the socialization, it tends to be virtual right now. After COVID, people found that they could do these things on Zoom instead of having 15 kids in their house, and each parent could buy their own supplies and then they just do it over Zoom together. Um, but there are still those that meet face to face. It's just dependent on the group. And I live near a major city, so that really helps.
Right. There is a few ladies in the homeschooling group that provide things like painting classes and stuff like that, which I think is really neat. And she allows the kids, she sets amounts, like only a certain amount can sign up at a time, but she provides all of the stuff that the kids are going to need. You just need to pay a certain fee at the for every week that you go.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. But what I'm doing right now with my girls focuses more on removing the indoctrination they've gotten so far into the thought that you have to be in a controlled environment with a set curriculum in order to be learning. Um, so we focus more on project style where it's not broken up into math, science, and literature all the time. You get a project that encompasses all of it in a practical way to show you the actual learning that's taking place instead of the rote memorization and indoctrination that they've gotten used to as a style of learning.
So you're moving towards a unschooling approach?
Right. And before we can get there, we have to deschool because they're still set in a mindset of they need an assignment with concrete values and a specific lesson.
Right. So you're taking a little bit away at a time to make that adjustment. That's a good
Yes.
idea.
Like, today they did some math worksheets from the internet. It was a little bit of laziness on my part, and it was also because they still are looking for that gratification that comes from having completed the assignment.
Right. So are you looking to eventually get rid of all books altogether, or are you going to continue with
Um,
math and English?
so English, especially, I want to get rid of the book style learning, English and science. Math, on the other hand, I think that no matter what I do to try and incorporate it outside of a lesson style structure, it doesn't function well as foreign language. Both of my girls are signed up for online foreign language courses, and um, or their instruments. One's learning recorder and the other's learning flute, Those are things that have to be lesson based. I can't think of any other way to approach them. I am definitely looking for resources, but everywhere I turn, it comes back to where they struggle when you do the unschooling is in maths.
Right. So how would you take a unschooling approach to English? Because with my day-to-day English with the kids, it's spelling lists and grammar and all that stuff, and it's all book learning.
So we will pick a book. We just did Alice in Wonderland. And rather than them having to study puns and read on puns and write puns, we find the puns and point them out and discuss them in the literature. They find words that they don't know what it means as we're reading along, and we'll say, "Hey, I don't know what that means." So we look it up together and discuss the meaning. And then later, when it comes time to do their journals for the day, which we do journal because it's a very healthy way to keep your writing skills up and mental health. Um, I ask that they at least bring up one of the vocabulary words that we discussed for the day in their journal. So there definitely is guidance to it, and definitely, but if Bailey, oh God, I shouldn't say names. I'm sorry. If one of them comes to me with a idea for their journal that's different from what we discussed, that's fine. If they want to draw today instead of write, that's fine too. But you still have to write out the vocabulary word and use it in a way that makes sense with your picture and defines the word.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. I think that's a really good way to go about it. Reading books is a good way to learn uh, words and looking words up if you don't understand them. So they would definitely get that.
And
See,
then for grammar and usage, which is also, I mean, it's less important in today's society than it has been in the past because of the way we communicate. Auto correct and autofill and spell check, but grammar and usage and spelling are still important. So uh, when we write in full sentences. When we do something on science, like we did a project to see whether pre-germinated seeds or seeds planted directly in soil, which would germinate, which would sprout faster. And they wrote lab reports, simple lab reports, and nothing, they're elementary, not high school level. But it's not like we sit down and this project is just for science, because in that we incorporate uh, language. You've
right.
got to use words correctly. Germinate is a big word.
Yeah.
And when you have to write it 4 times because for 4 days you had to go and observe the germinated seeds,
So
and
really, you're incorporating English into everything that they do.
well, I try to incorporate everything into everything. Montessori style, in that it's student led, so I give them options.
Right.
But every one of those options encompasses more than one aspect of their learning and gives them a new, fresh way to look at learning itself. Because that's the key that I'm trying to teach my kids with deschooling into unschooling, is that learning is the key, not the method by which you do it.
Right. I've had to change how I approach certain subjects over the years because I've noticed that my kids do not learn the same way. Like one of my daughters, when I was teaching her how to read, she picked it up rather fast. One of my sons was having a really difficult time with it, and me pushing the curriculum on him just made him upset and frustrated. And I had to take a step back and take a more relaxed approach with that subject for him.
Yeah, I love that about homeschooling, is that I get to individually assess my children and work with them at their level, which a teacher with 35 students is never going to be able to do. And,
Exactly.
and one of the things that we struggled with, all of my kids could read before they got into brick and mortar, and all of my kids did kindergarten in a brick and mortar public school situation. Um, and one of the things that worked for us in reading was that reading was never a school thing, it was a fun thing.
Right. And the curriculum, if you struggle with stuff like that, can really make it an unfun thing.
Yeah, my uh middle child, he's the one of the ones with an ASD diagnosis, and he fought me about reading if I told him to read. Like, okay guys, let's take 30 minutes of reading time tonight, and he would be like, screw you. But then I'd see him on his video games that he liked. He'd sit there and read 15 articles on them. So we incorporated magazine and other media as being part of reading too. So one of my girls now mostly reads manga on her
Okay,
own reading.
I've never heard of that.
Well, like we read the, like I was saying, Alice in Wonderland, we read together, but then they have their individual reading time. Um,
Right.
and it varies. Some days they'll do half an hour just of unsupervised reading, and other days they'll be really into a book and may spend 4 hours just reading for that day.
Yeah, my daughter's getting like that. She'll sit and read a novel in an hour, which I love that she sits there and reads like that.
So when I let them do that sort of reading, if they want to extend it, they've got to tell me how they can relate it uh, to more learning than just reading. So oftentimes they'll have to tell me something from the book that they're learning about a time period historically, or they have to come back with like for example, in Cammy's, I keep saying names. I'm so bad at this. In manga the other day, she came out and was like, "Oh, but mom, look, I'm learning about onomatopoeia," and I'm like, "Oh, help me out here." She's like, "Well, for this particular manga, every page is practically a poem, and it's run through with a letter as the theme." And so she showed me it, and I was like, okay, yeah. How about you write me a poem using onomatopoeia when you're done?
There you go.
And I asked them to seek out the lesson and things. Like they'll tell me something they're interested in. One of my daughters is really interested in LGBTQ and gender issues and discussion. And I'm like, okay, so what aspect of your education are we looking at here? And she'll be like, well, this has to do with my social, uh, and this has to do with my understanding of history versus modern events. And I can also bring in some lit and comp by writing a report, and we can do some art by making a poster. And I'm like, okay, sounds like a lesson.
That's really neat, the approach you take where you kind of let the kids make up their own lesson plans in a way. And they're still learning.
Right. It gives them some control over it, because that's one of the other biggest issues kids have from what I've seen. Like you said with your son with the lessons with reading, if you're trying to force it on him, he doesn't want to bother with it. It makes it even worse when they have some options. Like even if you want to do the structured lessons, if you get up in the morning and instead of saying you're going to do math, science, history in that order and in this way, you can say, well, for this week, I've got these math lessons, these science lessons, these history lessons, and these English lessons I'd like to go over. Is there one you want to start with today?
Right. Yeah, give them a little bit of control, and that way they're not fighting you so much.
Right. And they can choose, like with dinner, to take the bad medicine first and wash it down with the sweet later, eat the peas and then they can have their mashed potatoes, or they can scarf down the mashed potatoes and leave the peas to the end. But they got to eat it all.
Right. So it looks like What's Truth joined us in chat. Okay, got kids in bed. What's up? Nothing, just having a conversation. I don't know who's still here. I think Toe was here for a bit, and Vic, Ajot. If anybody wants to come up and ask questions or have be part of the discussion, you're welcome to. The link is pinned.
So I do have a question. You've homeschooled from the start, right?
Yes.
So, like, do you think it's easier having started with homeschooling than them having had some of the indoctrination and then trying to homeschool? Because I that's an experience I haven't had.
I think that, like, I have some friends that have done the back and forth with their kids, and they've homeschooled and public schooled, and they talk to me about the struggles that they go through with homeschooling, with their kids wanting to be in the public school system because they've had experience with being with their friends all day long. So I think because my kids have been homeschooled the whole time, that it probably has definitely made it easier because they don't they don't know what that environment is like, so they don't wish to get it back, kind of thing. They're they're happy with education has always been in the home setting, so that's all that they know, and they're happy with that.
And do you do secular homeschooling?
I have When I first started homeschooling, I got the really expensive curriculum, the big box curriculum. You're probably aware of it, where it has a set of books to go throughout the year. And I've I've changed throughout the years to a more relaxed method with a lot of the subjects. I have curriculum books for math and English to just keep them up with those two subjects, but I like to do science and history kind of on a as they're interested in those subjects, we discuss them and learn about them.
What I meant by secular is, do you teach from a religious viewpoint or from just um, the curriculum based, just based on reading, writing, math, or do you also have a religious basis to it? Like a lot of people in science won't teach evolution if they're coming from.
I am from the standpoint where I think I should teach my kids both sides and allow them to make the choice. It's not up for me to decide for them what they're going to believe in when they become adults. I can give them my opinions and teach them as best I can. And I've taught them about evolution and I've taught them about creation. And it's up to them to decide what they believe is true. I would be no better than the school system if I forced them to have an opinion.
So you go for the well-rounded, where if you teach them good critical thinking skills, then they'll be able to make those decisions in a good way on their own.
Right. I want them to be free thinkers and to look at situations and think for themselves. I don't want them to be programmed to act or believe a certain thing because I believe it.
Well, here in the States, a lot of the homeschool programs are based around religious theories because a lot of the people who homeschool do so because of the separation of church and state here, that they feel that religion is too far removed from the schools. So there's a really large majority of homeschoolers who do so from a religious standpoint.
There is definitely a homeschooling community here that's religious based, and um, schools for homeschoolers that are completely religious based. I just have not immersed myself in that. I keep religion out of education. Like, I teach them about the Bible and about God, but it's not like I force it on them through their educational learning.
Right. For example, one of the curriculums that I have seen that's used here, um, when you do English studies and you're reading, it's typically the Bible or Bible stories. They don't do much of, like you wouldn't be reading um, of Mice and Men, or like we're doing Alice in Wonderland, or anything like that, because it doesn't fit into the religious faith. It's
Right.
fantastical. So it's kind of scary that those are the people who are the majority here, and so they give this impression, another myth about homeschooling, that most people who are homeschooling their kids are cultists or religious fanatics.
Yes, that was one of the things I wanted to go over tonight too, is yeah, there is definitely people that believe it's for religious people, and that isn't the case. And a lot of people don't do it for religious reasons. And you're not religious at all, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. um I don't follow traditional religious paths directly, no. But definitely we have a very faith-based lifestyle. Um, Being pagan that we are, we um, I do have a daughter who's Christian. Two of my daughters were Christian for a while, and one has outgrown that currently. So I don't like limit them. Um, but we definitely discuss faith a lot, even in our schooling, because I think it's important for me in my life that faith is part of my learning experience. My faith is fed through knowledge that supports it.
Right.
So I definitely want to give them that access to that knowledge too. So I do maybe lean a little towards pushing them to be open about religion, but I
Well,
definitely don't want to set like a religious course of study for them, although those are available. And if that's something for some people that's important, there's some really great courses available to keep a Christian mindset through the education.
so have you been have you given your kids the opportunity to see Christian material, or do you keep
So both of my younger girls were in Bible club at school. They
okay.
also attended church with friends. Um, uh, my older girl even went on a missionary for 2 summers with a church with friends. She went to Kansas one year and helped to build a church. She was gone for 2 weeks. And
Wow.
then the next summer, she went on mission to North Carolina, and they built a home. Uh, what do they call it? The parsonage, right? Isn't that where the pastor lives? Anyway,
Are you, are you asking me?
yeah, right. It's the parsonage is where the
I'm not.
pastor lives near the church. The church owns it, and the pastor gets to live there. Well, they built one of those, a house for the pastor one summer. Um,
Which which form of Christianity are you talking about? Is that what you talk
in
about, Catholicism? Because is that the version of Christianity you're most familiar with?
Well, I mean, I'm familiar with most forms of Christianity and other faiths. I've done deep dives into most of them.
Right.
Uh, for my kids, what we're talking about is born again Christian,
Oh, okay.
Protestant faiths. Mostly American religions. For the older one, when she went on mission to be with to help build for the church, it was I think they're Seventh Day Adventists.
Oh,
It was one
okay.
of her friends. For the younger two, when they were in Bible club and were going to church with friends, it was I think it's just Church of Christ. Um,
Okay. See, I've known here Catholics that live close to their church, but the faith-based churches usually I don't think the pastors live near their churches. The ones I've known have had to drive to church every Sunday. So
Well, they were building a house as a parsonage that the church would own, but it was for the pastor and his family to live in. I think that's what it's called, parsonage. I should look it up. But anyway, um, I've always been open to whatever faith reaches out to you is the one that's right for you. So I'm kind of what they call spiritual eclectic, and there's parts of all of them that speak to me. Um, I try to find the similarities, and that to me is the word of the universe versus the differences, which is man putting his hand into it. So I come to that, I come at the table with that same sort of attitude with my kids is um, it's all true and it's all false. You've got to figure out for yourself what your heart knows to be true.
well, that's good that you're go with that approach with your children, and it'll allow them to make choices and to investigate for themselves, which I think, from my experience, that tends to be most homeschoolers' approach, because we want to get away from the indoctrination of public school and teach our kids to be a little bit more free thinking.
That tends to be probably the common factor that probably the vast majority of homeschooling parents have in common is that we want our kids to think. We don't want them to know because knowing isn't the answer. You can learn something and forget it rather quickly, but if you can think of where to find it again.
Right. Yes, that's true. If you're just taught to know answers, you don't understand how to, you don't understand the process to get to that answer. That's exactly right. Let me
I
see here.
also think another thing that homeschooling parents have in common uh, typically is the ability for a parent to stay home. Like most people who homeschool have at least one parent who's in the home all the time. And I can't imagine, I can't imagine. I was in college and working, and my husband was working when we homeschooled the two older boys. And I can tell you it's really difficult, but we were lucky because we worked opposite schedules. And during
Right.
my class time, we had a nanny come to the house.
Yeah, so you can make it work if that's the lifestyle that you're looking to achieve. Definitely. There are many moms out there and dads that want to homeschool and work for a living, and they just balance it.
Yeah, and anything that you really want, you can make happen. But it definitely is more difficult when there's not a parent in the home all the time. Um, One of the big things that we stress is self reliance. Again, here's the things you have to get done. This is the time you have to get them done. And if you can't get them done in that time, then I'll start taking your time.
Right. Yeah, I have, from my experience, me being home with the kids all day has been a priority. So I've made it a priority to get in a position where I can work from home. That way I could have more time with them.
I think too, a lot of parents are daunted about the idea of teaching their kids because we've been fed this load of crap that you need a bachelor's degree in education, and if you don't know all of these psychological and sociological factors, you're going to screw up your kids. And I'm like, dude, they're your kids. You made them. You're supposed to teach them and raise them. And so there's this fear that they're going to fail their kids before they even try.
Yes, definitely. And I think when you really look at it, you're dealing with your kids and you know your kids best. Like you said before, a teacher is dealing with 30 plus kids at one time. So you've got a lot of one-on-one time with your kids, which is something that they would lack in public school, which really allows them to thrive in a learning environment.
Well, I can get through twice the material in half the time with my girls
Yeah,
because of that one-on-one experience. And the enrichment is so much better because it's one-on-one, directed at where their personal weakness is, not trying to pick the most common, the lowest common denominator of the classroom.
it definitely. Like I grew up in the public school system, and from my experience in public school, I think that there's a lot of failures in the education system. Like I got taught a lot, in my opinion, a lot of useless information, and I didn't learn things I should have been learning in school.
Well, someone asked me, how am I teaching my kid the new maths? Because during the pandemic, we had a lot of kids doing virtual learning. And the parents that I spoke to, several of them have said, I couldn't wait for my kids to get back to school. It was driving me crazy trying to keep them on task. And well, it's not because they can't be on task, it's because the tasks they were assigned were not conducive to the environment they were in or to learning. Um, so, of course, the kids are going to balk at that. And so they base their idea of what they would be able to do homeschooling on this virtual learning thing that went down. And they're like, oh, I could never do that. And I'm like, well, no, that virtual learning that they set up here was crap.
Yeah.
You
Like
know,
I
after telling us for
remember,
years that having our kids sit and stare at a screen was detrimental to their health and mental well-being, they told us for 8 hours a day they're going to sit down and stare at a screen.
yeah, and it's interesting. When I was in public school, I didn't get taught some key things in history and stuff like that that I think I should have learned about. I didn't when I walked out of high school, I didn't even know who the prime minister currently was. That is how big the school system failed me. It was after I did it's all the learning I did after public school that helped me.
I shared a video today on my community page. It's a mom review thing, and it's this mother and son reviewing Gen Zers being asked basic questions in the street. And
Mhm.
three different girls were asked, "What state is Utah in?" And they answered it. Like the answer would have been, "It's not in a state. It is a state." But instead,
Yeah,
they named another state. They
I've
were asked, what two countries border the United States? And the girl goes, well, I don't know history. Like, bitch, that's geography.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
these are college students at a rally for LGBTQ rights. They were
Yeah.
asked who fought in the Civil War, and they had no idea. They're fighting for civil rights at a rally, but they don't even know how we got civil rights in the United States.
Yeah. See, that's what I was saying before. I think that the our education system is the reason why all of these people don't have those answers is because we're not being taught what we should be learning.
Well, no, here's the thing. The information is made available because there are things that people my age will say, oh, they never taught us that in school. And I'm like, fuck tart, if you'd have paid attention, they sure taught me. Um, the problem isn't just that the material isn't available, it's the way that we're teaching it, it's not absorbed. We
Right.
teach to test. You're going to pass the test and then you never need the information again.
That is true. Like in high school, I only had to take Canadian history for 1 year, and I could opt out of history for the following 2 years.
Well, and then even that 1 year of Canadian history that you took, they didn't apply it to your daily life. Like you said, you didn't know who the prime minister was. They didn't relate it to current events in such a way that it stuck with you. Like we were talking, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we were with his family for a funeral, and we were in a group of people my age who went to the same school as I did. And I brought up some local New Mexico history that we were all taught in the same classes. And they're like, well, I never learned that. And I'm like, most likely it wasn't that you couldn't have learned it. It's that it was presented to you in such a way that all you had to do was memorize a few facts for the test uh, by cramming, which is not a way to retain information, and pass the class. It wasn't about actually delving into the material and learning from it.
Right. For the
We're,
history, we didn't do exams. We did an essay. We had to write like a 5,000 page essay about something that happened in the war. That was what our final mark for that subject was.
you see, and I think history is is a discussion, and um, memorizing dates or names um, doesn't give you the full gist of it.
Right.
Um, but I see that with most subjects is that it's the way it's presented. It almost like it intentionally turns them off to retaining the information.
I would probably like my son loves history, and he is only in grade 5, and he'll sit on his free time and watch videos about all of the wars and the planes, and he'll come to me and be able to tell me about certain planes and people that were in the wars and describe things that happened. He's he loves, I guess, these videos present it in such a way where he's able to retain all this information, and at that moment when he watches it, he has an interest in the subject, so he's sitting there and absorbing it all, and it's fascinating to me that the way I was taught history, maybe I, I would probably tune it out because I don't remember a lot from those classes in school. I got into history and learning about it as an adult, but he's just so young and he just loves to sit there and watch these history videos. And he comes to me and my husband, he talks, he can name all of these details, and it's just amazing to me.
So with my youngest, she's very artistic, and she's not as inclined to get into the maths, but science really interests her. So I try to incorporate the maths into her science,
Mm,
and I find that she absorbs it better. Like when there's a practical use for it.
right. I had to do something similar with my son, like the son that I told you loves watching history shows and about history and planes and stuff. He hated doing English work. So if I took English into something that he was passionate about, like history and video games, he was more ready to learn words and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and That's the key, I think, to healthy learning is being able to make it practical, make it
Right.
fit into their interests and be practical in their life, because then they actually show, and they once they're interested in it, they put an effort into it.
I definitely get that. Having to just sit and do worksheets and not understand why is probably why a lot of people fail in a public school setting. It just doesn't make sense of why you need to sit there and learn it. I was probably like that as a kid, and that's probably why I walked out of public school not knowing what I should know.
Well, and do you have No Child Left Behind or something similar there?
No.
So here in the States, we have this law. It's a concept of No Child Left Behind, where essentially nobody gets held back anymore in the lower grades. Um, they're carried on and supposed to be given enrichment to help them catch up. But what it really does is lower the common denominator in the class. And so students who might be excelling are made to be bored because they're going over basic concepts repeatedly because the class is full of students who haven't mastered them yet and were allowed to move forward.
Right.
Um,
Well,
you have to actually
here
fight to have your child held back here in the States.
here there's options for tutoring outside of the normal classes if your child is struggling in the public school situation. And there is also um, alternative classes for children with learning disabilities or having a harder time keeping up with their grade level.
But we have that, but in general, they pass them through to the next grade whether they're meeting the standards or not.
I am unaware of when I was in school, they had no problem leaving you behind or letting you stay back a grade. I'm not sure if it's changed here recently because I've been outside of the public school system because all my kids are homeschooled. So I've never had to encounter that. And so I don't know if they have those kinds of programs here or not.
Yeah, here they it's really hard to get left behind. You literally have to advocate for it for your student and be like, look, my student's not ready to go. And if the parents don't advocate, they move them through. And then if they haven't gotten the stuff from this grade level and they're moved on to the next, they're not going to learn the stuff in the next because they don't have the basis from the one before it, the way that our schools are designed. Whereas I don't worry about a grade level to teach my kids at. I teach them at their level.
Right. Last when I was last in the public school system, they were willing if you didn't meet the grade, you would be left behind and have to repeat that grade level. Th- That's the way
Yeah,
it
we used to
was.
do that here too, but we don't anymore. So our school systems are really screwed because once a student learns that they're going to get passed through, whether or not they put in the effort, they become less likely to put in the effort.
Um, well, that's America. I'm trying to look up BC and see. Yep, in BC they still fail you if you're under 50%. If your end year mark is under 50.
Passed in 2001 here in the States, the No Child Left Behind Act.
Oh wow. So it's been like that for a while. See, I was still in school after 2001.
So the way they did it was to hold the schools accountable through funding. If your kids, you don't have enough students passing, the teachers get poor marks, they don't get raises. And then if the entire school system is not producing kids at grade level rather than giving them more funding, which is what they really need. They take away funding from those schools. So it encourages the schools to pass the kids even though they're not passing in order to maintain their funding.
Interesting. Here, funding is an issue, and especially in BC where I live for the public school systems. We actually have a lot of teachers doing strikes because the funding is so low.
We have that here too in the States. We spend almost twice as much annually per prisoner than we do for student per student.
Wow. Definitely shouldn't be that way. But yeah, it's a bit, our school systems are probably failing, and a big reason might be funding because we just don't put what we should in our educational systems. And the it probably affects the teachers in a big way where they just don't have the motivation.
You would think that being that the United States has your back militarily, you guys would have more money to put into education. Like here, the reason we don't put money into education is because 75% of our budget is spent on military.
Wow. I, I
But you
don't
guys
think we
also have
have,
universal health and we don't.
right. We do, which is free health, emergency health care, which allows you to be able to walk into a hospital and get free care if you need it.
And here, cancer will make you go bankrupt.
Here, cancer, you can go to a hospital and get treatment, but if you need medication, which most cancer patients need medication, that can run you a lot. My stepfather's had cancer for the last like 25 years, and he's struggling to pay for his meds.
Well, here, if you have to go into, say, the emergency room, for example, my son was injured and I had to take him to the emergency room a little over a decade ago. Geez, almost 15 years ago, or more. And we didn't have health insurance at the time. We were a young couple. The emergency room bill was really high, and we were making small payments that they kept sending back because it wasn't enough. It wasn't their minimum. So they took us to court, and we went to court, and the judge granted them to garnish us at 75% of our wages to pay off this debt.
Wow.
So we were forced to file a bankruptcy because we could not live on 25% of our wages.
That's crazy.
All because my son was injured and we had like a $7,000 medical debt that would have left us unable to live for 6 months while they garnished us.
Wow. And is it still like that?
Oh, it's worse in some places. You can, they can attach your assets. Like, say you own your home, even though you don't
Right.
own it outright, but you have equity in it. They will attach your asset, auction off your home, pay off your loan, and take the rest.
Wow. That's that's a crime right there.
But if you file bankruptcy, you get to keep your home.
And then be in that debt.
Well, bankruptcy isn't a debt, but it just makes your credit fucked. Bankruptcy discharges the debt, but then nobody else wants to give you any credit because you had
Right.
to say, I can't pay this debt and have it discharged. And then that also counts as income for you, debt relief. And you have to pay income tax on the debt relief.
Wow. Man. It must be, it must give you guys anxiety worrying about if you need to go into the hospital or not.
Well, I don't know if you recently saw, and I hate to bring it up, but Mr. Crude's medical situation.
Yeah, yes, I did.
Half the reason he didn't want to go in is he has a very limited insurance and he wasn't sure what would be covered and he couldn't afford the medical bill.
Wow. And then it got worse
Right. He
and
was
with
hoping
major
it would
medical.
get better by treating it at home to save the cost.
Right. And then ended up getting way worse.
And then once it starts spiraling down, it gets even harder to go in because now you're looking at an even bigger bill.
Right.
You know, I had a friend who his dad had diabetes and he cut himself at work one day. And he was treating the wound at home and it infected. He ended up losing his arm
Wow.
because
Oh,
he was the worse it got, the more afraid he was to go in at the expense because he had no medical insurance. In the end, they were they'd owned their home, they'd had their home for 20 years and only had 10 years left on their mortgage. They lost their home. They ended up homeless with huge medical debts, and his dad ended up taking his own life because he couldn't handle it all.
that's crazy. So, is it a good amount to just go in and get something as simple as antibiotics?
So if you have no health insurance, the minimum fee just to walk in the door of an urgent care for me is $75. That doesn't
Okay.
account any tests, that doesn't include any medication, that doesn't include any treatment you may receive there. It's just the base fee to walk in the door.
Wow.
And it
So it
only
just
covers administrative costs and nothing more because you'll get a bill from the doctor, you'll get a bill from the radiologist, you'll get a bill from the radiology department if you have any x-rays or tests. You get a bill from the lab separately. These are billed later, but for example, the incidents I'm talking about is my son hit his head and he had they didn't even do a CT. They just did an exam in the ER of him for concussion, and it was a
right.
$7,000 bill, over 7,000.
That's that's insane.
Um,
Oh my
my
goodness.
my daughter broke her ankle, and we didn't have health insurance. By the time it was all said and done, I think it cost us. We were lucky; we were part of a health savings account with his work, but I think it was in the neighborhood of. We didn't do ER, we went to urgent care, and it was in the neighborhood of about $4,000 to get her ankle set.
I think I understand why Americans look at me and ask me how I can afford so many kids.
Well, and then there's the birth itself.
Crazy.
Most insurance that you buy doesn't cover pregnancy. You have to get what's called a pregnancy rider. So you could have insurance, great insurance, but then you get pregnant and it doesn't cover the pregnancy or the birth.
Wow. See, we have free prenatal care, and there's no fee to for the time that you spend in the hospital.
On average, it costs an American about $50,000 to have a baby.
Oh my goodness.
If you have insurance, you can cut that down to about 10 because of copays and deductibles. If you got the pregnancy rider. If you did not get the pregnancy rider, you pay the full amount. And then um,
How do you Americans afford that?
the majority of people who have children in America are the very poor, and they get a state insurance that does cover it.
Oh, okay.
But you have to
So,
qualify. And that's why you see most people who are middle class don't have children in the States, or very few.
oh,
They can't afford them. You have to either be really wealthy or very poor. And then the very poor, it's the state who's paying for it all, but the care is way below the level of the wealthy family.
basic care. That's awful.
And
That's really awful.
you see people in the States not get married, so that one partner can have state insurance while the other works to cover their illness or pregnancy or other things.
So when in the states they don't look at common law as the same as marriage,
It depends. Um,
because here if you live with somebody and you're in a relationship with somebody for so long, they consider you common law and it's the same as if you're married.
it varies state to state, um, and you have to lay claim to being married for it to work. They don't automatically put you as married.
Hmm,
Well, and
interesting.
that's because they would have had to have accepted gay marriage a lot sooner because of all of the people that they considered cohabitating then would have had to have been considered married too, right?
Right, I didn't even think about that. And I wonder if here it was just a female male situation. I think it I think it depends on the situation. Because if you're being roommates and being a couple are two completely different things. And having kids in the mix and everything. But when you
It,
do your taxes, it's pretty obvious. Like you've got
that's where
to,
it comes down to. Did you mark married or single on your taxes? And it's up to you to do that
well, we
here.
have a common law box too.
Well, and see, but you have to opt on that box still. And you would do so because it gives you the better tax benefit, I'm sure.
That's true. That's true.
And that's the thing that I'm most grateful to homeschooling for, is that I get to teach my kids um, real things, like what checking boxes means, how to read a contract and actually know what the fuck it's telling you.
Yeah, because I think in our society, a lot of people just skim over agreements. Like even as something as simple as when they set up a Facebook account, I don't think anybody sits and reads the contract that they're signing to get that account.
You're giving them a lot of credit to think that they skim it. They just click on accept. No, I'm going to
Well,
tell you,
I've always skimmed it.
I worked for a phone company for a long time in customer care,
Yeah,
and 90% of the people would call in about something, and I'm like, this is what your contract reads, and they're like, no it doesn't, and I'm like, did you read your contract? And then you get silence.
huh?
It's like, well, how about we read it together then? In the States, if you buy a house, you go to the closing and there's this huge contract. It's 600, 800 pages long. And they sit there and they summarize it for you and tell you initial here and sign here. And they don't want to give you the time to read through it. They summarize it, but that's not the same as you actually reading it.
Yeah, I've been in situations where I've read things I was signing, and the person that was waiting very impatient with me. Did I? Did, are you still there?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. It went really quiet, and I thought my
No,
internet gave out.
I just muted to listen.
But yeah, I was reading a contract recently that I had to sign, and it was very important. And he got very impatient with me sitting there reading it and tried to give me the gist of it and get me to sign and hurry along.
So we have these laws here in the States, HIPAA laws, and they require you to sign consent, and they require you to sign, um, be fully informed about the costs going in.
Right.
Um, so when you get there, they ask you to sign that you've been given a copy of of their privacy and of their HIPAA. Uh, and they have you sign it without actually giving you the paper. And most people just sign it. And I'm like, well, I know the HIPAA laws generically, but I have not seen your privacy policy. I'm not going to sign that I've seen it. And they're like,
Right.
well, you can go on your phone and look it up, but can you just sign it so that I can get you checked in? And I'm like, you're asking me to sign that I've seen something I've never signed. I mean, I've signed that I've seen something I've never seen.
Mm-hmm.
When we went to close on the house, they got really mad at me because they kept trying to summarize and have us sign and skim through. And I'm reading it and I'm like, wait, you said this, but what about this? It says this also. Yeah, but that's only in these really rare circumstances. That's not probably going to happen. I'm like, yeah, but I need to know that because what if I'm one of the people who gets that rare circumstance?
Right. Exactly.
You know, um, they don't want you to read it. They get really, like you said, impatient. They think you're being rude instead of just signing it.
Yeah, it's not something that most people do. It throws them off, I think.
I I also recall like signing when we were getting the car for my daughter, and we're reading through, and the guy's like, well, it's just a basic contract, and he tries to like give us this summary, and I'm like, no, we're gonna read it. Like, you want me to put my signature on something, I'm gonna know what every word of the document says. For all I know, I'm swearing to give you my firstborn son.
Well, that's good that you take the time to do that, and you're teaching your kids to do that also, because a lot of kids aren't taught that.
How many times a day do people just push accept on their phone without ever looking at what it says? In fact, they get mad when an app makes you scroll through the whole thing before you can push accept.
Yep. Yep. That's true. When I had an Apple phone, I did that. And you have to sign an agreement to be able to use an Apple product. They won't even let you use it without agreeing to it. And I just accepted it. And it was years later, somebody went over what every Apple user agrees to and what information you give away. And I was just baffled. I was like, oh my goodness, what did I do? But in the end, are we going to not give away these privacy things because we want that phone, right?
Well, see, and for me, I don't believe in privacy, but that's a whole nother discussion. I think that the key factor about it all is that you know what you're signing, you know what you're
Yeah.
agreeing to. And one of the things, I'm sorry, that schools discourage, public schools in general discourage, is an inquisitive mind. Don't ask questions. Don't try to jump ahead. Don't read ahead. Don't do anything except for the exact instructions I give you. And so they get out of school and they go to these places to sign these contracts, and they're already set in this mindset of, oh, well, I just do what they tell me. They tell me to sign here, I'm going to sign here. I don't need to
Yeah.
read ahead.
You know, and I don't have the benefits that my kids have. I was in the public school system and I still am retraining myself not to have that impulse and to take a second and think it through and read through things because that has been programmed in me since 3.
Yeah, I think that's the gist of our society, is that they have been so programmed that they don't even question it. They don't question what rights they're giving up. And
No.
then later they'll demand those same rights that they signed away.
Yeah. Like as I left public school and became an adult and started learning on my own and waking up, I guess is the term you would use. And I started learning about all of these things that I signed up for without knowing, like when I got my driver's license and all that stuff, the rights that I gave away before I was even aware that I was giving up these rights. We we aren't taught about it or told to read through these contracts we sign up for, and then years down the road we realize what we did and it's too late in a sense.
So here in the States, back in the 80s and 90s, they used to send college kids credit cards, not applications, credit cards. So my first time through college, I received in the mail at least 50 credit cards that I never activated. Um, but a lot of kids I knew did. And they would sign these contracts by using the card.
Oh wow.
Like the way you agree to the terms is by using the card. Now they outlawed that practice in the late 90s, early 2000s. But these are kids who finished a high school level education and were not smart enough to go and read the contract before they used the card. Now, the card was shipped to you in a very thick envelope with the entire contract written out for you to read. And that the use of the card signified your agreement to the terms. And they were getting themselves into 24% credit card debt.
Wow. On top of the debt that they're walking into by going to college.
Right. On top of taking out student loans.
I hear a big complaint from Americans is that of how long it takes to get out of student debt. Like it will run you about 30 to 60, maybe 70,000 to go through community college here in Canada. Is it similar in America or is it more?
All the way through to my grad degree, I have just under 100,000 in student loan debt. And though I make payments, it continues to grow as opposed to go down.
Because of interest.
Right. And because of punishments that they give you if you're not able to pay the amounts in the time frame that they want you to.
Wow. Yeah. I think they do a similar thing here. The interest rates are high and you got to keep up with the payments. A lot of people go bankrupt because of it.
Well, and then they compound them monthly, which means whatever interest isn't paid at the end of the month gets added to the principal so they can charge you interest on the interest.
Right.
So you're
What's
not
true
just paying
said.
interest on the original principal, you're paying interest on unpaid interest.
Yes, which is crazy. It's like another thing. Like I sit back and think like how taxes are similar to that. I feel like we get taxed from our paychecks and then we pay taxes and everything we buy is taxed. We're like paying tax on tax on tax. It's ridiculous.
And these are things that we in homeschooling we can educate our kids about, but they're not
Yeah.
educating them about in the schools.
No, it's quite a shock to you when you go through public school and then you start working and you know how much you're making an hour and you see your paycheck and then you see how much they took from you for the first time and it's quite a shock.
I think that's a TikTok theme, first paycheck.
What's truth
Like,
in the chat? Asked Tiffany what her school gave her for being an honor student. Nothing. They gave me nothing. Except a poor
Oh, well,
education.
Tiffany, I'm really enjoying having this chat, but I'm struggling to stay awake, my dear.
Understandable. Well, thank you for joining me, Nikki. I appreciate the talk and I enjoyed it. And maybe we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Please do invite me back again. I really enjoyed it too.
Hopefully, we can do it. Hopefully, in the future, we can do it at a time that's not so late.
Or I'll actually get my nap in.
Yeah, that would help.
Because my
Well,
internet seems to be working pretty damn good this late.
I wonder if that's because of the hours, probably.
Yep,
Well, thank you for joining me.
But anyway, good night, and thank you for having me.
Yes. Do you want to say goodbye to everybody before you go? Or...
Oh, Den finally got his ass in here. It's so funny. He was sleeping and I'm awake. I told him it's a CERN moment. But I stopped calling them bizarro moments. Now they're CERN moments.
Oh, yeah, Dennison, you missed the whole show.
And it was awesome to read your comments. What's Truth and Hottie and Vic and was that Defend I saw in there?
Yes.
Wow, you got a pretty decent run through here. So again, like I said, thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to more chats like this.
Yes, have a good night.
You also. Bye.
Well, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed that chat with Nikki. I put her link in the description if you guys aren't subbed to her. You guys should definitely go check out her channel and show her some support and subscribe. I probably will wrap this up now because nobody else has jumped up. Can't believe you missed the whole show, Dennison. Thank you, What's Truth, for being here and showing your support. Defend for dropping by. Vic and Toe for Life, thank you guys for dropping by. Ajot, Popcorn, Penny. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the show and hope you guys have a good night.